Welcome back to another episode of Demystifying Self-Publishing. I'm your host, Alyssa, and today I am joined by one of our authors, Karen Cumming. Thank you so much for being here today, Karen.
Hi, Alyssa. Thanks very much for the invitation.
I'm really excited to chat about not only your two projects, but also what the future is looking like for you in terms of things that might be coming down the pipeline. Also, some of your expertise, because I know our authors are always really interested in how they can go about, building an online presence, engaging with the media, and those are things that you have a lot of experience in and have really excelled at. So if we could jump in, I would love for you to just talk a little bit about yourself and introduce yourself to our audience.
Sure. Well, it's lovely to be here. As you said, my name's Karen Cumming. I've spent most of my life as a journalist, but also as a teacher. I started out in radio and television many years ago. I've written for major market newspapers and magazines as well. So I have a pretty well-rounded background in media. The education world is something that really prompted this latest book. So for that, I'm very grateful to it. But I've always been interested in writing, and it was just so gratifying to me to be able to complete not only one but two books. To me, I can identify with anyone who's listening right now who either has already written a book or who really wants to write a book. They feel that they have this inside of them, and all it needs to do is to come out. I can identify with that feeling, and I'm looking forward to offering some tips.
Absolutely. I think that that is really a great place to start is maybe where did you find the inspiration to kind of initiate that first book and put that pen to paper? And was the idea of writing a book something that always resonated with you and you were just kind of waiting for an idea, or was it more the inspiration hit you and you knew that this was something that needed to be out in the world?
Well, it was probably a little bit of both. I have an old friend who I went to Ryerson with many years ago who became a copywriter and a novelist. And he once said to me, the only reason to write a book is because you can't not write a book. And I think that is really, really good advice. And it really applies to the first book that I wrote, which is called The Indispensable Survival Guide to Ontario's Long-Term Care System. I wrote it together with my sister, and we did this just before the pandemic hit. Really, we were guiding our 98-year-old mother, Verna, into the long-term care system. We didn't know a thing about it. We had no education whatsoever when it came to all of the decisions that had to be made and all of the things that we were really supposed to know. And at the end of the day, I wrote a feature newspaper article about our experience of it for the Hamilton Spectator. We got a lot of really positive response to it. A lot of people were really appreciative. I got emails from people saying, thank you for doing this. This is really going to help our family. And I really knew, I just knew deep inside me, I knew that there was a reason to write a book, something that would allow people to have some kind of a resource that they could turn to in a world where really that doesn't exist. It didn't exist 5 or 6 years ago when we wrote the book, and it really doesn't exist in a meaningful way right now, I don't think either.
I think that, there's definitely something to be said about having something that resonates with you so personally and so deeply and identifying that gap. And instead of kind of, sitting back and thinking, well, that's maybe somebody else's journey to explore. You tackled it head on and decided that that was going to be your journey to explore, which I just think is so admirable.
Well, I think it's partly the fact that when you have background as a journalist, a little piece of you just gets mad. Like you're just mad that this is
Right,
the way it is, and you feel a sense of justice, like that you've got to do something to even the scales for people who may
right.
not even understand how difficult an experience lies ahead of them, if it should ever lie ahead of them. It just seems so incredibly unfair that the system is not designed to help people. I really do believe that there was just this rage, this anger inside of me just said this isn't right. Somebody has to do something to help people.
Absolutely. And I think, taking a little bit of a pivot to your more recent project, The Wealthy Martian, that is something that also stemmed from a gap in, our school systems and what we are
Yes.
or aren't teaching our children. So, how did that experience come about and inspire this next book of yours?
Happy to talk about that. I'd love to talk about this one too. I'm going to say it's about 12 or 13 years ago. I was sitting at home on my living room sofa one night and scrolling CNN, I think it was, and I saw this headline and it said, "Want to live on Mars? Apply now." And my journalistic curiosity got the better of me, so I read the story. And the story was all about a company called Mars One, which was a Dutch space exploration company that was headed up by a Dutch businessman named Bas Lansdorp. And he was looking for citizen astronauts to go to Mars, people who were willing to jump on to this crazy adventure, this wild rocket ride, and devote themselves to this notion of colonizing the red planet. And when I read about the story and the description of the kind of people he was looking for, I thought almost immediately, this is so perfect for me. It's perfect for the journalist in me. I'm so curious. I love to document things for other people, whether that be might be me in space and me documenting life on another planet for the people left on Earth. How perfect. Assignment of a lifetime, as far as I was concerned. Now, a lot of people didn't agree with me on that, but I still believe it's the assignment of a lifetime. As a teacher, to be able to teach people about space from space in very much the same way that Chris Hadfield did when he was on board the International Space Station. I had such admiration for him and how creative he was in the way that he engaged young people. He took his
Mm,
guitar into space. He recorded music videos that were, David Bowie's Space Oddity, that kind of thing. He took his camera into space. He took these amazing photos of Earth from the ISS and he put them into a book and he traveled the country and spoke about it. I thought, wow, if I could do this much of what Chris Hadfield did as an educator, wouldn't that be amazing? And then thirdly, as an adventurous person, I thought, my gosh, this is the adventure of a lifetime. How could I possibly
absolutely.
say no to this? So I decided to apply. And the one person I didn't tell was my 94-year-old mother, who would have hated it, like just hated it. So I did not tell her.
Some things are
And
better left unsaid.
totally, if you'd known my mom, you would have known that truer words were never spoken. So I kept waiting to hear back, and they narrowed it down once, and I made the cut. It went from about 2,200 people down to I think it was about 1,100. So that was exciting, right? And we weren't allowed to talk about it or say anything to anybody. And they kept making cuts again and again, and I kept making the cut again and again. And finally, in February of 2014, they announced what they called the Mars 100. And I was one of them. We were one of 100 people from around the world who made it to the final round of citizen astronaut selection in a legitimate mission to colonize Mars. And I was doing cartwheels through the house. I was so excited. I felt like I won the lottery. And it's been such a wild experience over the last more than a decade now. The mission actually wound down in the fall of 2021. The CEO, very regretfully, he wound it down because he'd spent a decade looking for investors with very deep pockets who would be willing to lose their money if it all exploded in the sky. And,
Right.
not surprisingly, it's not as easy as you might imagine to find those people. But
Right.
for more than a decade, I was one of this, merry band of adventurers. And just, I talked to students online and in person, all over the place about the ideas of space exploration and about pursuing your dream and all these fun things. And I was literally, quite literally, convinced that I was going to be chosen as one of the final 24. That was the plan, to narrow it down from 100 to 24. Those 24 would be divided into 6 crews of 4. And once every 2 years, which is when the orbital windows between Earth and Mars intersect, we would go, be launched to head for Mars. It was a 7-month journey. It was going to be. I was convinced I was going to be going. We were going into 10 years of training, everything from how to be a doctor, how to be a dentist, how to grow your own food, all of these cool things. And I was convinced I was going. And so when you're convinced that you're going to leave home, whether that's Earth or just your house to go live in another country, let's say, you start paying very particular attention to all the wonderful things you're going to miss. And it made me very conscious of the fact that Earth is a magnificent place, and we do so many wonderful things here that I would miss, whether it was food and wine and people, my family, my friends, my pets, all of those great things. But at the same time, it also gave me the opportunity to notice some of the things that we don't do so well here on Earth. And I
Right.
knew from experience in the classroom that we do not do a good job of offering young people, or any of us really, any kind of meaningful financial literacy education, personal financial literacy education. And
Right.
we could debate the reasons why. I have some theories of my own, but at the end of the day, that's the way it is. And I just knew that I wanted to write about this. I wanted to do something that would offer help to young kids, to young or teenagers, to young people in their 20s and 30s, and to people like me. I'm semi-retired.
Mm,
This wasn't taught in school when I was young. It's still not being taught in school in a
right.
meaningful way. And I just knew that there was a reason to write this book. People needed help, and especially the times that we're living through right now. I don't think it's ever been a more timely topic to be talking about with people, really.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is such a fascinating story that has all led to the point of this book being written and published. And you were so right in the fact that, I mean, I was born in 1991. So I was in high school from 2005 to 2009, approximately, through elementary school, through high school, even through college. I learned nothing pertaining to things like taxes, mortgages, student loans until I had to apply for one for college. And I think now of, my two toddlers and how their lives are going to look in the coming years, and really trying to make conscious efforts to set them up for financial success, because it's something that growing up in our household at least was not talked about. We did not talk about finances. Finances were private. And
Exactly.
I'm wondering if there was a bit of a generational mindset at play when things like curriculum for students in elementary school and high school were being created. Um, it
Well,
really makes me
personally, I
wonder.
mean, it's a great topic for debate. I
Hmm.
personally feel that it's been done to us by design. The people at the top don't want the people in the middle or at the bottom to understand money, because if we understand money and how to help ourselves make our money make money, then suddenly the economy doesn't roll so smoothly as it once did, because now people don't want to do the work. They just want to invest their money, watch it make more money, enjoy their families like wealthy people do.
Yep.
And that just isn't the way of the world.
Right.
These are my thoughts on the issue after much research and much observation. I really believe that that's true. And that is another thing that made me mad. Made me mad as a journalist to think that, I mean, I honestly believe that all generations, but I'll take my generation as an example. I'm the tail end of the baby boom. I was
Right.
born in the very early 1960s. And I received no financial literacy education whatsoever. And if you were not fortunate to live in a household where that was valued, or where perhaps your parents worked in the financial industry, or perhaps you came from a family that had generational wealth, how
Mm,
were you supposed to learn these things? I mean, it's
right.
much the same as with the long-term care industry. How are you supposed to know what to do if nobody teaches you? It's
Right.
literally the same principle. And yeah, it made me mad, and it still makes me mad, because I know that when people do not have the understanding of how things work, you mentioned taxes, interest rates, credit cards, all this stuff. Guess who benefits? The banks.
Yeah.
It's like they say in Vegas, the house always wins. It's the same with the banking industry. When people are ignorant of how it works, guess who profits? Guess who
Yeah.
wins? The banking industry does. That's the way they like it. And to be honest with you, I honestly believe that's the way they want it to stay. And
Mm,
that's why it's only last spring that the Ontario government announced that they would be mandating some kind of financial literacy education in the secondary school system as of this coming fall. They haven't said anything about what it's going to be like or who's going to deliver it or what they're going to talk about. So,
right.
I mean, who knows? But how is it possible that this education has not been delivered for decades? I'm 63 years old. That means that for at least like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 decades, school has not taught us about money. And that's
Mm,
ridiculous.
it is.
Absolutely ridiculous.
I mean, I can certainly think of some topics that I could do without that I did learn about in elementary school, in high school, that I've never in present day had to apply in everyday
What?
life.
You don't need to know what the angle of an isosceles triangle is?
I
You don't
haven't in the
learn.
last few years.
It's funny how that works, isn't it?
It certainly is. So speaking about, your background in journalism and how that has fueled kind of this curiosity and this passion around things that maybe are less widely known to many people. One of the things that often comes up in conversation with authors, particularly pertaining to the marketing aspect of, their book has now been published, and what do we do with it now that we have this final product, is securing things like media engagement and these interviews and speaking engagements. Can you talk a little bit about how your background has kind of shaped your approach to that promotional side of
Sure.
publishing a book?
I think it's really useful to take a look at both of the books that I've written because both of them have been a very different experience from a promotional point of view. The first book, it came out in December of 2019, just a couple of months before the pandemic. And I slash we, myself and my sister, we were very fortunate because of the fact that I've worked in the media for a long time. I used to produce talk shows. I used to produce newscasts. I reported all that sort of thing. As a talk show producer, I understand what talk show hosts are looking for.
Right.
So I knew how to craft an email that sold myself, sold my book, sold the need for people to know about this. I sent it to virtually every radio station, television station, newspaper I could think of, some of which I'd worked for before.
Hmm.
I was fortunate to appear on CBC radio several times, on our local CHTV because I used to work at CHTV as a reporter producer. I've been on twice now for the second book and was on once for the first book, which was fantastic. The Hamilton Spectator's done a feature on the first book. There, I mean, we had so much success with publicity. As you can imagine, it lasted for about 2.5 months. As soon as the pandemic hit, boom, everyone's attention went in another direction, understandably, and it slowed considerably. But one thing I can say is this: in 5 years, 2019, 5 or 6 years to 2025, promoting the second book is a completely different ball game. I can tell you that, I can tell you from experience because I've done it again myself. All of the things that I did the first time, completely ineffective the second time, 6 years
Really?
later.
Talk
Completely
about that. I'm
ineffective.
curious about that shift.
I've sent, it's not to say that I didn't try, because I have.
Right.
I've sent emails to radio and television producers, and it's crickets. You don't get a response. It's not the way it works anymore, is what I've been told. If they want you, they will find you on social media. And if they like what you have to say, that's how you get on radio and television and in newspapers these days. So
Interesting.
it's been a
Interesting.
real experience. It's been a learning curve, that's for sure. Um,
Absolutely. That would be an incredible incredible adjustment having gone
Yeah.
for, you know, the duration of your career with things being done a certain way to then having
Yes.
success pursuing, you know, your own book and the promotion of it in a
Hmm.
certain way. And then, you know, several years go by and suddenly it's moot in terms of that effort.
Yes. Well, interestingly, the first book it came out at the end of December of 2019, and it was out there for January, February, and let's say March of 2020. I was told at the time that it was phenomenally successful for a self-published book.
Mm,
The sales at the end of the day, I think I actually wrote into Tellwell and asked them if they could help me compile the numbers for the whole last 5 years of the book. And I'd have to double check this, but I'm pretty sure that that book sold 2,600 copies. And
that's
that's
incredible.
like a landslide right off the top the first couple of months, slowed down to a trickle for probably a couple of years,
Mm,
but it still seems to have some legs. People talk about it, there's word of mouth. It doesn't sell a lot right now because I'm not promoting it at
right.
all, but there are sales of it. Like, it surprises me that it continues to sell because people have heard of it and they tell their friends and all that sort of thing. So when you go from, to be told it was one of the most successful self-published books in a couple of months, to have achieved that kind of success in a few months, to go from that to 5 or 6 years later, realizing that the only way that I was going to reach anybody was if I was to go to the places where people are. And people are on social media now. They're on Instagram, they're on TikTok. To some degree, they're still on Facebook. I didn't know anything about Instagram or TikTok, nothing. I had a consultation with one of Telwell's marketing folks that was very informative, very instructive. And I thought to myself, well, I worked in radio and television for years. I should be able to figure this out. And what I discovered is that I could not figure it out, and that I wound up hiring someone for 3 months. She was fantastic. She did a wonderful job of producing great videos that we ran on Instagram and TikTok. At the end of the day, I was only hiring her for a finite period of time because I didn't have a huge budget to be able to keep her for longer than that. But she taught me what I needed to know. So I know how to use the tools that are required to shoot, to edit, to write the scripts, to be able to read off the teleprompter, all those things. I've learned everything that a person needs to know to be able to do their own thing. And I think one thing that I could offer to anybody who might be in that situation now, maybe you've written your book and maybe you're just wondering, well, now what? What do I do? How do I do this? I would say that um, it's very tempting to say to yourself, I can do this. I can watch tutorials on YouTube. I can figure this out. Well, no one's saying that you can't, and maybe you can, but it's going to take a lot longer to try to
Mm,
figure it out unless you have help, especially when there's a generational gap. I mean, I'm 63 years old now. I mean, this world was very new to me in terms of how to record content, how to post content, all that sort of thing. So,
right.
one piece of advice I would have is, if you can afford it in some way, do what you can to hire someone to help you, because you'll shorten your timeline a lot if you do that.
Hmm.
Another thing that I would say too is that in the beginning, it's kind of like a honeymoon phase. It's very exciting to be recording your videos. You know how to post them, you know how to write the text underneath that has to go in the comment, all that stuff. It's fun. You're having a great time. And maybe you're posting 3 or 4 times a week and you're slowly building your followers and all that sort of thing. One thing that I think it's important to understand is that it's not just about you and what it is you have to say and your content and all of that. You have to remember that there's an algorithm at play, and the
Mm,
algorithm doesn't always play ball in the nicest way. So you can be putting lots of time and effort into your posts, believing that you're doing the best job you can, and I'm sure you are. and you might not see an increase in followers for a long time.
Right.
And my advice would be don't give up. Don't
Mm-hmm.
allow that to deter you. Don't become disappointed by that. I would say it's not your fault. There's a
Right.
lot more involved here than meets the eye. And there are things that we have no control over that are dictating in some ways how many people are following. So don't lose hope and don't give up. Just be consistent as you can, and keep going. Um,
I think that that's great advice. And one thing that I know that I often tell people is that social media in particular is a long game. It's a marathon, it's not a sprint. It does take time, it does take consistency, it does take two-way engagement. You can't simply, oh, I've posted 5 times. Why don't I have 1,000 new followers now? It really does require that time and that effort. And it's okay also to acknowledge when something's not your strength. It's okay to
yes,
look to others who do have unique strengths outside of your own and bring them in for assistance where needed. And I think that that
absolutely.
is a really important thing to note. Now, with that in mind, since implementing some of this social strategy, have you noticed that those opportunities then have started to come back from these different media outlets?
I would have to say no, not yet. But as you say, this is a long game. It's
Mm-hmm.
not a sprint, it is a marathon. I think the longer that the accounts are up, the more beneficial it is to me because I can say to someone, oh, by the way, you can follow me on Instagram. You can follow me on TikTok. You'll find great content there about such and such. I think it's very beneficial, and the challenge is to keep going when you're not seeing the results that perhaps you might be hoping for. I
Right.
think at the end of the day, we have to realize that this is the way the world works now. And if we're going to play in the sandbox, we have to learn what the toys are, and we have to learn
Right.
how they work and how to use them. And the longer you do it, the better you get at it. I would also say that something that I've experienced, and it's just something that you grow through, is that sometimes you just sort of feel a bit of a sense of, why am I doing this?
Mm,
Why am I posting 4 times a week when my followers aren't increasing and I don't seem to get a lot of engagement and people aren't commenting, and I'm doing my best to do all the things I know I'm supposed to be doing, but it's not having an effect. And so maybe instead of posting 3 or 4 times a week, now you're just posting on Mondays, or now you're not recording anything, you're just reposting other people's videos. And there's a lot to be said for that, actually. I'll
right.
mention that. I didn't really even know when I first started this that you could do that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually a pretty great thing because it gives you a break. You don't feel that you constantly have to be recording content. If you see a video that you really like and you think aligns with what it is that you have to say, you can repost that video and,
Right.
in the comments underneath, you explain who it is and why you like them so much and what it is they have to teach us. That's a really great thing. And I think that's something that people might remember, is that it doesn't always have to be you. You don't always have to feel pressure to have to produce something 3 4 times a week, even though they're short videos. They, for me, they don't take a long time to write, they don't take long to record. It's a bit finicky when you're first learning how to edit them and post them, but once you get good at it, it does go fairly quickly. But just this idea that you can repost other people's videos. And I think it's just as constructive and just as educational for anybody who might be following you.
Not to mention, it's a really great cross promotional opportunity. It allows for you to now also perhaps have that person's eyes on your page or your account when they maybe previously wouldn't have.
Hmm.
And also their audience's eyes if that is something that, draws attention from their audience to see
Yes.
this person that they follow and their content on another page. So that's a really great point, I think, when you're referring to, you know, it's okay if the content isn't yours and you're curating content as long as you're giving credit where that
Yes.
content is being curated.
Of course, yes, yes. And something else that I learned I didn't know, months ago, is that it's if someone has posted something and it's out there and there's a way that you go into the system to repost, as long as it's available to repost, you can do it. You don't have to
Hmm.
ask permission, you don't have to pay them or anything like that. So
Right.
that was a useful piece of information to know too.
Absolutely. Even on TikTok, is the one that first comes to mind. You have the opportunity to do what they refer to as a stitch. And so you
Yes,
can create your own video as, a reaction to another piece of
yes.
content that already exists,
Which
which is
is
a
fun.
really
I
easy and fun way to kind of create that new
It
piece of
is.
content.
It is when I had assistants, this great young woman who was I called her my social media director. We did a couple of stitches, and it was a lot of fun. I haven't done it myself yet. That's on my list of things I want to do in the new year.
Absolutely. I think that that's a great goal. So, with that in mind, when you do happen upon these different opportunities and the media appearances, the podcasts, different speaking engagements, and things like that, how would you say is the best way for somebody who maybe is uncomfortable in front of the camera or speaking about themselves to prepare for something like that?
Sure. I would say the best possible advice I could ever give anybody is to just be yourself
Mm,
and to not be worried about saying things perfectly or getting every point out exactly the way that you think it should be communicated. I've been doing this for a long time, and there are times when I'll do something on television and I'll watch myself and I think, oh man, why didn't I say such and such? Or why didn't I do this or that? It's so easy to be a Monday morning quarterback and to look at what you've done and say, "Oh, you should have done this or that." No, you did the best you could. You were yourself. You
mm.
were passionate about what you were talking about. You were excited to be there. Obviously you're on a mission to try to help people, and that's why you wanted to be there. And if you can tick off all of those boxes, you've done a good job and you have nothing to be worried about.
That's great advice. I do think, there is a little bit of hesitancy and reluctance sometimes around appearing on camera and having, your voice out there and your opinions heard. And one thing that I think is important to acknowledge is that your story is yours and that you were called to share that story with the world for a specific reason. And I think as long as you are well intentioned, that at the end of the day, just putting yourself out there at all is a huge success.
Totally. And we live in
Now,
a very different world these days. I mean, you're so much younger than I am. All of this social media and, these kinds of interviews, these didn't exist when I was your age.
right.
So, I mean, I think it's also good for people to realize that this is probably the greatest time in history to ever be promoting anything because
Absolutely.
there are people everywhere doing podcasts. There are, so many social media accounts. I mean, it's such a popular thing. People spend hours a day looking at Instagram, and they're following you, and they're going to see what you put out there. It actually is a pretty incredible time and an interesting time to be part of all of that, and working towards promoting something that means a lot to you.
Absolutely. It really helps to level the playing field, I think, having these different forms of media because you no longer require these huge advertising budgets to have your project or product put out in front of other people. You can,
Yes.
set up your phone, which you probably already have, and record a video or post a picture with a link. And immediately you now have the opportunity of reaching thousands of people. I mean, if you think about the number of people who are active users and what the algorithm for virality is, it's really hit and miss. So it really could only
Sure
take
is.
one video to take off before your project is seen by the masses.
Well, that's what my social media assistant kept saying to me. You never know which one it's going to be. And you just have to keep putting it out there because one day you'll put one out there and it'll be like 1 million people will see it. And the fascinating thing to me is that you just don't know which one it's going to be. So you have no
Right.
alternative but to keep going.
Right. That's so true. That's a great, I mean, a great perspective. So now, how would you say you manage all of the efforts behind the scene to actually promote your projects? How do you manage the intersection of writing the books themselves and then the promotional aspect?
I think one of the great um, misconceptions about writing a book is that you're finished after you finish writing the book.
Mm-hmm.
That's what
Yes.
I would venture to say most people think.
Right.
And I can tell you with this book, I spent almost all of 2023 working on writing this book,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a religion for me. I worked on it every day. On my days off, I would sit for an entire day and work on it. I would work late into the evenings around my job. I did it because I loved it, and I wanted it to be as good as I could possibly make it. And that, when you come from a media background, you're trained to respond to deadlines. So it didn't bother me because I knew, well, my goal is to have this finished by the end of the year. That means that I need to sit down and work on it for 3 or 4 hours every day and, write and rewrite. That's another misconception, I think, too. People think that writing a book is about writing a book. In my experience, writing a book is about rewriting a book
Mm.
over and over and over and over again. It
Yes.
doesn't matter if it takes 4 times, 5 times, 6 times. You might do the whole thing that many times because you want it to be that good. And
Right.
that's maybe something else for people to keep in mind. It can be a gargantuan task. I mean, it's
Absolutely.
no wonder that the whole world doesn't sit down and write a book. But if you've decided that that's what you want to do, that you have something inside of you that you want to say in a way that nobody else has ever said it before, then you basically don't have any choice but to sit down and start writing.
Right, right. Well, you think about, just the routine behavior of, okay, if I have this deadline, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write. How does that work on the days where inspiration is just lacking?
You know what? I'm going to compare this to going to the gym.
Mm,
This past summer, I decided that I wanted to revisit weight training. I had done it many years ago and had fallen off the wagon, and I wanted to become strong. So I went to a little gym in the neighborhood for 3 months, which is what my budget could afford. And I learned everything that I could. And I set up a very modest gym in my basement, just with the bare minimum of equipment, but it's wonderful. And I go down every day because I know that consistency is what gets results in the gym. If you're not consistent, you're just not going to see results. And I think it's exactly the same with writing. You need to understand that it's a discipline. It's about being consistent. It's about sitting down in that seat, maybe not every day, but as many days during the week as you possibly can,
right.
and just setting yourself little bite-sized goals. Like, let me sit down and write for 20 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And what almost always happens is as you well know, you write for 20 minutes and now you're in the zone and you just keep going. And the next time you
Yes.
look at the clock, 2 hours have gone by, 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours. It feels like 5 minutes. But without that consistency and that mindset that says, I need to sit down and be disciplined and to do this every day if I can, it's I think a lot more challenging to come up with a finished product in a timely way.
Mm. I think that, when we're thinking about writing, we often think about, oh, I have this wonderful story and I would love for people to have it. And oftentimes, the journey from point A, which is that initial thought, to point B, which is the final product in the end user's hand, is very much something that is misunderstood. There are multiple ways to get from point A to point B, whether that is, you know, something that spans over decades and someone is slowly picking away at a manuscript that's been sitting in
Yes,
their drawer for ages, or,
definitely.
you know, they hammer out the project really quickly and then they are really quick to get it to market through a self-publishing, do-it-yourself kind of platform like
Hmm.
Amazon KDP.
Yeah,
And I'm curious to know, and we're going to take a little bit of a pivot here to our user submitted question, which is the plot thickens, because it
sure.
ties in very nicely here, I think. So I go ahead and I post these requests for user submitted questions every
Great idea.
week, depending on the guests that we have. For those who are listening and aren't yet following on Instagram, please be sure to check us out at Tellwell Publishing and you can submit your own questions for future guests. But Jay submitted a question that I thought was interesting, which is, why did you personally choose to pursue self publishing as the route to get your book into the hands of your audience?
Well, I personally don't see any other way.
Mm,
I mean, the traditional publishing industry, I think, is very one-sided. I mean, 40 years ago, you could send a manuscript to a publishing company and you might have a chance of someone looking at it and giving you a review and writing you back. And I think those days are just so gone. If a publisher is interested in you, they're going to come after you.
mm,
It's not a case of trying to reach out to them, or at least maybe not as much as that used to be.
right,
So for me, I mean, I just realized that my only option was to self-publish if I wanted to actually create a book.
right,
And I did. I
right,
wanted to create that book badly enough that it wasn't an issue for me that it wasn't a traditional publisher. And to be honest with you, who knows if that's even the better option? Who knows how all of that works out,
mm-hmm,
in terms of payments and royalties and all that sort of thing. Yes, you might get better, or not better, but more promotion provided from a traditional publisher, but perhaps they take the lion's share of the profits and it's really not so good for you in the end. I
right,
like the autonomy of knowing that my books are self-published and that if I choose to order 100 copies of the book so that I can sell it at a conference or at a convention somewhere, that I can do that and I can control my own destiny as opposed to being beholden to a publishing company that tells me what to do.
absolutely. I think that that is a really common theme for those that do end up pursuing self publishing, is kind of the role of a gatekeeper that the traditional publishing industry often plays for those who are looking to have their manuscript published and made available to the masses. Because, just because you didn't pursue traditional publishing doesn't mean that A, you couldn't have, or B, that your product wasn't good enough for traditional publishing. And I think
Oh,
that that
yeah.
is kind of a shift in conversation in the last decade.
Totally. I agree with that. I think to the contrary, there
Hmm.
are many self-published books that are excellent.
Absolutely.
Just because they don't have Simon and Schuster behind them doesn't mean anything. In the early days of the internet, I know that the author of the book The Martian,
Hmm.
whose name escapes me at the
Andy
moment.
Weir.
Andy Weir, thank you very
Yes.
much. I actually saw Andy Weir speak about 10 years ago. Incredibly funny man, very entertaining speaker. But if I'm not mistaken, I think he started by putting some of his chapters online. and people started
Amazing.
reading them and clamored for more, and that was part of his success.
It really is interesting to hear of how that journey has the journey and the conversation, I think, around publishing has just kind of continued to evolve. And I'm really interested in this next question, which is, with things like AI now in the mix, do you have any thought or ideas about what this industry might look like in the next couple of years?
Well, I can tell you this. I've never felt so fortunate ever that my book was published before AI really took hold. I feel so fortunate because my book is my voice. It's my way of telling my story. It's my way of writing in a way that I hoped then and continue to hope is engaging and fun and entertaining. If I had even had the option of going to AI if I was stuck on a chapter and asking it to give me, 3 paragraphs on cash stuffing because I'm having a writer's block today. Can you help
Right.
me? Which I honestly don't think I ever would have done, but I'm sure that, people do. It's an option, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think it just takes away the pride that I would have had in doing it myself. Like,
Right.
honestly, I'm sure there are many advantages to AI. I mean, I know that I've used it for certain things, and I think it does have its benefits, but I don't think it has any benefits at all when it comes to writing books. If you're going to, in my view, if you're going to write a book, it's supposed to be what you think. It's supposed to be your voice, what it is you want to say to people. If you go to AI and ask it for help, I think that's the height of dishonesty and
Right.
deception.
That's a valid point. In our first podcast episode, we chatted with Tim, who is the CEO and founder of our company, and he had mentioned also that, you know, the writing process itself is such a personal and cathartic experience for a lot of people. And you, depending on the type of content that you're writing, can often, explore different parts of yourself and come out on the other end a completely different person, or perhaps somebody who has been healed through exploring some of that narrative and that internal kind of process. And that AI and the implementation of AI really kind of is a disservice to your own personal journey in the writing process. And I thought that that was a really interesting perspective as well.
I completely agree with that, 100%. There are things that I wrote in this book that um, gave me the opportunity to explore how I really think and what I really believe. And I find when you put that on paper and
Mm-hmm.
then after it's published and you read it again, you just kind of go, I do think that. I do believe that. And that is part
Right.
of who I am. And it feels good to say that to people, to have it written down for, posterity.
Right.
These are my beliefs, and this is what I feel is important. That's a really wonderful point, and I think that AI robs people of that opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So speaking about the books that you have published, with the focus of your first being on long-term care and the second being about, you know, maybe what was lacking in our education system pertaining to financial literacy, what advice would you give to aspiring authors who do want to tackle some of those complex or more societal issues in their writing?
I would encourage them. I mean, I think it's the greatest thing in the world to be able to sit down and actually put your thoughts on paper and compile a book that
Right.
addresses whether it's you're more of a journalist and you take that approach, you're trying to address some injustice in the world and make it a more just system, help people try to even the scales, or if you're a novelist and you have a story running around in your head that it just wants to come out of you, I would just encourage anyone.
Amazing. I love that answer. I think that this is a really great segue into the idea that you posed initially at the top of our conversation, which was being driven by anger when it came to choosing some of, the topics within your books. Is there anything that's angering you currently that we might see in an upcoming book
Yes.
from you, Karen?
As a matter of fact, it's interesting that you would ask me that question, Alyssa, because I find myself more and more every day, based on the world that we are living in
Mm,
and all of the revelations that seem to be coming out, whether you're watching Instagram or TikTok, whatever your platform of choice is. I like to use the word bamboozled, and if
mm,
I write another book, it will be called Bamboozled. I'm shocked, shocked at the number of lies that we have apparently been told for our entire existence in the name of profits for big pharma, big food, big finance, you name it. All of these things that we have naively believed because we couldn't fathom that someone would treat us so poorly in the name of turning a profit. We couldn't believe they would lie to us like that. And it has become quite apparent to me that there are many, many, many examples that we can point to of human beings on planet Earth being straight up lied to in the name of profits. And I think that would make for an interesting exploration.
I absolutely agree, and I hope that we have that to look forward to in the future.
I'll keep you posted.
Please do. I just have a couple rapid fire questions to wrap up this interview. We've really enjoyed having your company today, Karen, and we can get right into it here. So, this question is one that actually was posed kind of earlier within this conversation. So I think I know the answer here, but routine writing or when inspiration strikes.
Oh, routine writing every time.
Amazing.
It's great to write when inspiration strikes. Don't get me
Hmm.
wrong. That's a wonderful time too. But you can't rely on inspiration striking on a regular basis. If I was going to draw an analogy, it would kind of be like when I used to work in the news business and radio. You had to type up a newscast in 15 minutes, 20 minutes, a 5 minute newscast. And I worked with a guy who was very old school, a great journalist, and he would say, I can't just slap it together. I'm building a fine cathedral. And
Mm,
that's the way you have to look at it. You're building, it's almost like a piece of architecture. You're building it from the foundation up, and it requires time and effort and care and patience if you want it to really be a striking building or cathedral or whatever it is you're envisioning it as. So I think that's important too.
absolutely. I think that that's a great analogy. Digital or traditional media platforms for book promotion?
Well, see, I'm a fan of old school because that's where I spent most of my time working in media when it was traditional and when it did have rules. If
Hmm.
you reached out to a talk show producer, you could expect that they would call you and either say, "Hey, I love that idea. Come on the show," or, "Sorry, that's not for us." And now it just doesn't work like that anymore. I like the old schooled way that traditional media used to work. That being said, I know that it's gone. And I know that the only way to move forward is to make friends with the new way of doing things. And
Right.
that's taken me months now. And it's necessary. That's all there is to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And last but not least, what is your current favorite social media platform?
I don't know if I should go on record saying this or not, but I do love Instagram. I love
Okay.
Instagram for the educational aspect of it. I mean, obviously, we all curate our own feeds. I'm not interested in cat videos really. I mean, the odd puppy video I do enjoy, but for the most part, I learn every day from Instagram. Whether I'm watching someone cook a recipe or some piece of philosophy that somebody's talking about, or how to build. I mean, I watch this guy who shows you how to build an energy efficient tiny house, how to put solar panels on a van. I mean, stuff like that. That like I never had a source for this kind of information before, so I try to curb my exposure. Maybe half an hour a day is what I try to keep it to, but I really do enjoy Instagram.
Amazing. I think that that's great that you have kind of tailored your feed and the algorithm around things that are purposeful and can provide you with that educational kind of content, because
Yes.
I think too often we get caught in what is, I think, referred to as doom scrolling, where you can sit and scroll and the content that you consume is not something that is serving you in a
Exactly.
mentally fulfilling way. And so the fact that you are really conscious of that is just great. So
Well, I don't want to mislead you. I try. I try. I'm not always successful because
that's
sometimes
fair.
I do get caught up in a bit of that other stuff too,
Yeah,
especially now.
it's hard
But I
not
do
to.
try.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much again, Karen, for being here and for participating in this conversation. It's
Thank you
been
for
really
having me. It's been a
enlightening.
lot of fun. It's really enjoyable to talk about this process and to encourage other people.
Amazing. I'm so happy to hear that. And I hope that everyone listening has also enjoyed this conversation. If you aren't already, please be sure to give us a follow. You can check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, or you can check out our full recorded episodes on YouTube. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.